Hey, I'm Gareth from Park Cameras, and today we're going to be talking about long exposure photography, what it is, how to do it, and what looks good when using long exposure. So, long exposure photography is when you leave your shutter open for longer than usual. So, for example, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, even a few minutes, and you can get some really interesting results depending on what you're photographing. So let's talk about what you're going to need to shoot long exposure photography. So the very first thing you're going to need definitely is a tripod, and this is an absolute must. So because you're going to leave your shutter open for something like 20 seconds or 30 seconds or something like that, you are going to need something to stabilize your camera, because any slight movement is going to result in your picture either at best not being sharp and at worst being just completely blurry and completely unusable. So you're going to need a nice sturdy tripod to stabilize your camera, and that's going to mean that your camera's going to be stood in one position for the whole duration of the exposure, and you're not going to get that blurriness to your picture. The other main issue that you're going to have is the amount of light coming into the camera. So because your shutter speed is going to be so long, because it's going to be 10, 20, 30 seconds, something like that, you are going to have a lot of light coming in. You're going to have a way to reduce the amount of light that your camera picks up, otherwise your photo is just going to be completely blown out and unusable. So obviously you can stop down your aperture to something like f/22, but most of the time that's not going to work if you've got a shutter speed of 10 seconds or longer. So you're going to need something else, and that's where these come in. So this is an ND filter, and specifically this is a Hoya Pro ND 1000. So this is a 10-stop ND filter, and what that does, it screws onto your lens, and that's going to stop a lot of light coming in. So it's going to really reduce the amount, I mean, you can see that just looks like it's black, but you're going to really reduce the amount of light coming into your camera, so that even though you've got your shutter open for so long, 20 or 30 seconds, something like that, it's not going to be completely overwhelmed with light, and you're not going to blow out your photos. You can also use things like graduated ND filters or even a variable ND filter, but I've found that variable ND filters sometimes can not work so well. Either they're not strong enough, or you can end up with that kind of cross across the picture, which you don't want. So this one is really good. It's incredibly powerful as well, so you can get a nice long shutter speed, but it also doesn't really color cast things, and yeah, just don't really get any problems at all with it. Really happy with that one. So once you've got everything you need to take the photographs, you're going to need something to photograph. So anything with movement is going to look really good. So for example, water, running water, rivers, waterfalls, even just the sea with the waves, anything like that's going to look really good. Things like clouds moving through the sky, lights that are moving, anything with movement is going to look good, because you're going to be able to emphasize that movement with the long exposure. So let's start with water. So let's say you're taking a picture of something like the sea or a lake, or really any body of water. If it's got ripples or if it's got waves in the case of the sea, the long exposure is going to smooth all of that out, and you're going to be left with a nice sort of smooth body of water. Now, in the terms of the sea, you're probably going to end up with what looks like kind of a misty body of water, which is really, really cool. You can have some really cool effects. So I'll show you what I mean. So in this photo, this is taken with a pretty sort of normal shutter speed, and it's 1/400th of a second. And it's just of the low tide on the beach with the rocks and things like that. And you can see the waves in the water, and it's all pretty normal. But this photo, taken in the same area, was taken with a 30-second exposure. And you can see it has just completely removed all of the waves. It's completely just evened out the water. It's all smooth, and you've got that kind of misty effect on the top from where the waves were lapping over the rocks and things like that. And it looks really cool. This is exactly the shot I wanted to get. I'm really happy that I was able to get down to that beach at low tide, sunset, perfect, and get the shot, which is great. And that's only achievable because I had the ND filter with me, and I was able to get that shot. Similarly, this shot was taken at a lake, and because I used the ND filter, this is just the middle of the day, but because I used the ND filter, I was able to get a 20-second exposure time, and that meant that the water, the ripples in the water, but that was just evened out, and the reflections were brought out as well, so you get this nice kind of reflection shot of the lake. And again, that's only possible because I had the ND filter with me. But of course, if you're able to find something with a bit more motion, so for example, here when we went to Wales, I was able to find these waterfalls, and obviously there's a lot of motion there, there's a lot of running water running through the waterfall, and that's able to create some really, really interesting effects. So I was able to get an exposure time of 30 seconds, again, because I have an ND filter with me, and that meant that I was able to completely even out the flow of the water coming down the waterfall, and it almost creates like this look of silk, like a smooth silk flowing down instead of water. It makes the water look completely smooth. It was really cool. There were loads of waterfalls around, so I was able to get a few different shots. But that was an awesome experience, and with the long exposure, it really emphasizes the waterfalls and the motion. It looks really good. So how would you set these shots up? Well, you start by obviously popping your camera on the tripod and then compose your shot. So before you even attach the ND filter, compose your shot first. So once it's on the tripod, get it into the right position, compose the shot. Once you're happy with how it's gonna look, pop the ND filter on, screw it on the front of your lens, and then you're going to want to shoot with your aperture something like, I was using f8 and f11. You can use whatever you like. If you need to stop down even further to reduce the light, you can, but I found that f8 and f11 work really, really well. But then once the ND filter's on, you can just drop your shutter speed down to something like 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, depends what you can get away with depending on what ND filter you're using, and it depends on the situation. So I would generally recommend just trying one, so pick 20 seconds, take the photo and see what it looks like, both in terms of exposure and the effect that you're getting, and then just play around from there. Now, another big tip that's really, really gonna help is when you're taking a photo, do it with either a remote, so you don't actually have to touch the camera when you take the photo, or set a 2-second timer so that when you press the button to take the photo, it counts down from 2 and then takes the photo. Why? Because even the smallest vibration of you just taking the photo can actually cause enough of a shake to make your photo either just not sharp or blur it, and that's absolutely not something you want. So I always at least use the timer, or if I have my remote with me, then I will pop that on as well, just to make it easier, just to make it safer, and so I know 100% that it's not gonna affect the outcome. Now, another thing that can affect the outcome is anything like wind blowing against the tripod, so you wanna make sure you do have a really nice sturdy tripod. Obviously it goes without saying not to touch the camera while it's exposing, while it's taking the photo, but anything you can do to minimize any environmental effect on the camera, moving it, is gonna help. That makes a big difference, and you just need to be aware of your surroundings when you're doing this. So let's talk about what else looks good in terms of long exposure. So obviously we've covered water, but anything like clouds moving through the sky can look really good, because if you expose for longer, you've got like a nice landscape shot. But if you do a longer exposure, you can get the clouds, if they're moving fast enough, just a bit of movement, just a hint of movement in the sky can actually just really add to the overall landscape shot. Lights is another one that can look really good as well. So car lights, anything that's moving with lights on it, it's gonna look really good, so you get those light streaks. Now we'll do a whole nother video about how to actually capture those light streaks at some point, but that's another one that can look really good for long exposure. You can also use a very similar technique to capture the night sky and get the stars. But again, that's one that's worth its own whole video, because that's slightly different. So just to recap, want to be using a tripod to stabilize your camera. You want to find something with movement to emphasize the movement in the shot. You want to compose first and then attach the ND filter. And you want to take the shot using either the timer or a remote. So I hope you found that all helpful. If you have any questions, pop them down in the comments below. I'd also love to hear about anything else you shot with long exposure that looked really cool. If you like the video, hit the like button. Make sure to subscribe if you're not already. I'll see you in the next video. And as always, thanks for watching.